Let's talk about health. I love it. We do it every Wednesday at noon. I needed an extra. Hey, you got to stretch yourself. Hi, everybody. Welcome. We're stretching ourselves here. Welcome to the program. My name is Dean. You can get me at deanblundell.substack.com. If you were here, you already know that. And a couple of weeks ago, I did a Twitter live spaces. Now, before everybody here on Substack's like, what the bleep are you doing on Twitter? Because it's like when you say Twitter, Ange, it's like Voldemort when you talk about Twitter here, as you know, right? Everybody.
I know.
But I got a chance to sit down with a Twitter Spaces about the great Ostrich caper of 2025 with this lovely lady who is a virologist, one of the world's foremost, an American import to Canada, working in Saskatchewan. Excuse me. At one of the most important virology centers in the world. And she needs no introduction because, well, the Ostrich people can't stand her. But, if you're interested in your health and having a health talk, this is my friend, Dr. Angela Rasmussen, ladies and gentlemen. Hopefully I got your name right this time. Did I?
No, you didn't. It's Rasmussen, but that's okay, Dean.
Rasmussen.
Everybody pronounces it wrong constantly, so it's all good.
I suck.
It's all right. The only people who pronounce it right are people who are also Scandinavian or from Minnesota.
Yeah, okay. Rasmussen.
Yeah.
Rasmussen.
Rasmussen.
So you get lazy in the middle of the last name a little bit, right? Is it Rasmussen, not Rasmussen. You don't have to overcook it. Okay, Rasmussen.
There's no umlaut in there.
Okay. Okay. Before we get to RFK, before we get to hepatitis schedules, before we get to children's vaccines, before we get to the ostriches, I have to ask you, because you and I spent some time in Nashville at some meetings a few weeks ago. It was right when the Olivia Newsy story broke. Ryan Lizza has done this unbelievable job reclaiming his life and pointing out the dangers of mainstream media, but also getting to the details of what almost crushed his entire life. You and I have been fascinated by the story. Are you paying attention to Ryan's series at all?
I am. I mean, it certainly... I like gossip, and also I like integrity, which Olivia Newsy does not have, and neither does Bobby. I also am just interested in anything that has to do with RFK because he needs to go.
Okay. What do you make of the bombshell allegations with the Health and Human Services Secretary, RFK Jr., sending Olivia Newsy into a Donald Trump paint sitting with a recorder as he was trying desperately to hide this salacious affair he was having with Olivia Newsy?
I mean, well, first of all, obviously I'm not a journalist, but that's not... My understanding is that that's not a very ethical thing to do if you are, is to act as essentially a political operative for the person that you are covering, much less like fucking them. That's a whole separate thing. But yeah, I mean, I'm not impressed with Olivia Newsy's tactics. I have to say, I talked to her in October of 2020, when Trump got COVID. She called me and asked to interview me about whether it was safe for her to get on Air Force One because Trump had been on there, and if she was in danger of getting COVID. And she was telling me that she was smoking a cigarette while she was talking to me. And I was like, actually keep smoking, because it seems like people who smoke are not as likely to get COVID. There was like a preprint about that at the time. So I remember giving her advice to continue smoking and to wear a mask when she was on Air Force One, and she'd probably be fine.
She called one of the world's most foremost virologists for like a little side advice about, should I mask up on Air Force One? What do you think?
She was also asking me about Trump's treatment regimen, because they gave him 8 grams of monoclonal antibodies, which is an unbelievable amount of monoclonal antibodies, when he had COVID. So I think they gave him everything. And I think now he hadn't been vaccinated at that point, because vaccines were just almost available, but not quite in the US. So they just pumped him full of monoclonal antibodies, and unfortunately he got better.
God, I'm gonna love doing these health talks with you, Dr. Reggie. This is great. It's weird though, because you're at that intersection with what you do, because you are a truth teller, but you're also a doctor. You also are one of the most important virologists on the planet right now, trying to tell the truth. And it's interesting because I've watched your journey over the past couple of years. And then when you and I just happened to sit next to each other at a couple of meetings, and I was like, oh my God, this is Dr. Ange Rasmussen. This is her. I'm sitting next to like one of the most important voices when it comes to community protection, science, facts, and watched you for the previous week battle the ostrich community. And I thought to myself, there's nothing that sits in your sphere of influence that isn't being touched right now by the crazies. There's nothing in virology that isn't being challenged by people that have absolutely no fucking idea what they're talking about, that live to attack people like you, experts that understand the cause and effect of pandemics and virulent diseases which are currently running around our country. And it's not just, and we'll get to hepatitis in a second, we'll get to RFK in a second. It's not just bird flu and COVID. This is about protecting communities, about protecting humanity. And so, watching you go through the ostrich op, which was fucking hilarious, by the way. I know it wasn't hilarious for you. It was hilarious for me watching all those hillbillies run around, camping out, ODing, talking about how ostriches are more important than human beings for a solid 6 to 7 months. But they're doing a documentary about this now. And I wanted to kind of pick your brain about not just the documentary, but you know what went into like literally this crazy operation around diseased birds that needed to be called by the CFIA that turned into a rallying cry, like a global rallying cry about protecting birds full of disease. What happened?
So, I mean, this is really interesting to me, and this is why, like, the ostrich thing became so crazy for me. When I first came upon this story, I was just like scrolling on the health site and like saw this stuff about CFIA drones murdering ostriches. And I was like, I'm positive that CFIA does not have armed drones, first of all. But second of all, I'm like,
Correct.
what the fuck is going on at this ostrich farm? And so then I had some questions about actually my job, like flu pathogenesis in ostriches. I'm like, how sick do they get? Like, what is actually known about bird flu in ostriches?
Yeah.
Not that much, but they don't always get that sick. And we don't know basically if they can clear it, if they can harbor persistent infections, whatever. So I'm looking into it, like the science aspects of it. And then I'm like, holy shit, like, actually, if they don't cull these ostriches, it's going to fuck up the entire poultry export market. Like, it's going to destroy the Canadian economy. But then I also, as I continued watching these people, it stopped being like a bunch of hillbillies to me, and it started to look a lot like what I saw in the US, where it was also a bunch of hillbillies, different issues, hating Tony Fauci, hating virology research, hating public health measures. Certainly, that same crowd, the ostrich crowd, feels the same way about all of those things because half of them were in the trucker convoy. And it's the same people as in the US. Like, so we had January 6th, here we have the trucker convoy. And it's just the same stuff repeating. It's just like maple flavored.
Yeah. Maple MAGA. It's
Yeah,
exactly the same
basically.
thing. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And so that's how it became so contentious because as time went by, I would get asked, the ostrich people were kind of controlling the narrative, right? So they're saying like, oh, we've had these experts test it. We're doing scientific research. I'm like, oh, you are? Well, gee, I can understand what type of scientific research you're doing. This farm sure doesn't seem like a biologicals manufacturing plant to me. So let's look into that. And as I looked into it, I see that they are basically selling antibodies from these ostrich eggs as wellness supplements for hair loss, for weight loss, for acne. Based on this guy in Japan's work, he does the same thing effectively in Japan. Ostrich antibodies are known to work against different pathogens. Chicken antibodies do the same. There's actually a company in Canada that makes chicken antibodies for this purpose. Ostrich eggs are a lot bigger, so you can get more antibodies out of them. But this is one of the funniest things to me, right? These people are all anti-vaccine. There was this one convoy guy, Jim Kerr, Papa Bubbles, who was saying that you didn't even need an H5N1 vaccine, which, by the way, nobody needs right now because it's not transmitting between people. But you couldn't get one anyways if you wanted it. But that's beside the point. He said that you could just mist yourself in the face with like some ostrich yolk and you'd be all set. And so I'm just like, what are these?
Can you define all set? Like,
you're immune for life. And I mean, that is the thing. The ostrich people have been saying all this stuff. You know, if you've ever watched any of the Facebook Live videos about the ostrich stuff, Katie Pisitny, who's essentially the spokesperson for Universal Ostrich Farms, would always say it's day 253 or whatever of these antibody-rich ostriches. You know, but the thing that's so funny about it is all these people are anti-vaxxers. Their business depended upon them vaccinating the ostriches. That's how you get ostriches to make antibodies. So they were essentially vaccinating them with COVID vaccines. They were protein vaccines, not mRNA vaccines, but they were vaccinating them with COVID vaccines to make spike antibodies that would recognize the spike protein so they could impregnate masks with them. And then they moved into this, we're going to have a $3 billion a year business, was their projection, by selling these ostrich supplements. So I mean, these people are scammers, you know, and
yeah, the owners are right. Like the owners of Universal Ostrich Farms, they were heavy into the convoy. They are very anti-government. Love a lot of Bitcoin. We're telling the story about all this research that they're doing, and can't kill these magical ostriches because of the antibodies that they offer the world, including COVID. So you had literally the convoy people were owners of this fucking farm, and they bought in hook, line, and sinker to that whole wellness strategy that sits outside of any provable fucking science whatsoever.
Correct. And I'm positive that this was part of the strategy because they didn't want anybody to find out. This is my suspicion, my opinion, not a fact, but I don't think they wanted anybody to find out. So the law in Canada is that if you have an HPAI or highly pathogenic avian influenza bird flu outbreak, you have to report it to CFIA. And then they have to come out and test your animals. And if it's a commercial farm, like this one was, even though they say that these ostriches were like family members, they were producing them for meat, which actually makes sense because male ostriches, roosters, don't lay eggs. So you would want to actually get some profit off of those animals that you.
By the way, and I've said this several times as someone who has eaten ostrich multiple times, absolutely delicious.
I mean, it's okay. Like it's like one of these alternative meats. It's better than nothing. But
yeah, but listen, it's more delicious knowing how angry it makes them. So that's why it's so goddamn delicious.
Well, did you buy it from them? I mean, then you're like supporting.
I bought it from another ostrich farm. I literally ordered a dozen ostrich burgers while this was going on.
I was like, you've got like a freezer in your garage, like full of ostrich burgers.
I do, yeah, breasts and everything. Anyway, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt. Continue.
Yeah, no, I mean this business was like not really a business, and so it makes sense that their experts weren't really experts. And I mean, they are in the sense that they have PhDs or veterinary degrees, but they're not experts in influenza. And the only one who has some expertise in that area is actually also an anti-vaxxer. So they're bringing all this evidence to the forefront that they claim proves that the ostriches are safe, that we can test them, that CFIA did not test them sufficiently, that that PCR tests don't work, which they do. That they didn't sequence the virus and that the virus came from the US somehow, even though phylogenetic analysis demonstrates that it went from probably wild birds in BC. The same virus or a recent descendant of it ended up putting a patient in Ohio in the hospital. So, it was thought to be, and we don't know if it's not infecting people, but it's thought to be a more virulent virus. So it makes sense that you would cull the entire flock. But they didn't want CFIA to find out because they didn't want to have to cull the entire flock because they know damn well that if they did get a positive, which, I don't know what ostrich symptoms exactly look like if they have exactly the same symptoms as chickens, but they had like 70 ostriches drop dead. Like with an unexplained mortality event like that, you have to suspect avian flu. And so they violated the law by not reporting that. And somebody turned them in. Sure enough, they have avian flu. And so CFIA issued the notice to destroy, which is the Cole order. And basically the next day, Katie Pasitny had people from, the far right media, like out on the farm doing podcasts, doing interviews and things like that. So
Rebel
like right
News?
from
Was
the
Rebel News
beginning,
involved in this? Rebel News was
I don't know when Rebel News came on the scene, actually, but I'm sure there's Ostrich Farm followers who could probably tell you that. But you know, and she was just making the rounds, like
Yeah.
with kind of everybody who would have her, and at some point got hooked up with this guy John Katzmatidis in the U.S., who's a right wing radio host. He's a grocery store mogul of the fucking worst grocery store in New York City, that's for sure. I hate Gristedes. The only good thing they ever had there was one time they had $4, like they got some sort of mistaken shipment of Polish beer. And when I was in graduate school, like it was all we could afford living in New York City. So we all drank Gristedes out of their supply of this beer called Crate. But that's the only nice thing I can say about Gristedes. Anyway, so the guy who made billions of dollars starting Gristedes, started paying their legal bills and then called up his friend, Donald Trump, and called up his other friend, Dr. Oz, and called up his other friend, RFK Jr. And so RFK Jr., Jay Bhattacharya, who's the NIH director, Marty McCary, who's the FDA commissioner, and Oz all wrote the president of CFIA a letter telling him to export the birds to the U.S. so that they could go live on Dr. Oz's Florida estate and they could be studied to cure bird flu because they live to be like 80 years old. And somehow that's going to tell us about immune durability in humans, even though birds are extremely different. And obviously, we're not very closely related evolutionary wise to the ostrich.
Mm. It's a lot.
That would have also, by the way, violated the international trade agreements for both the U.S. and Canada, by the way, if they had done that.
Yes.
So,
well,
yeah.
Listen, let's kind of just dig into that for a quick second if we can, because going back to the reason that these ostriches need to be called, it's because they were full of bird flu, H1N1. It would have destroyed
H5.
H5N1, my bad. H5N1, I don't know what the difference is between the 1 and the 5, but the 5 sounds worse because it's a higher number. How does that sound?
That's not true. So H1N1 that was 1918, and that's the 2009 pandemic as well. Really quick, I'll just say these are called subtypes. So the virus particle has 2 proteins on the outside of it. One is called hemagglutinin, one is called neuraminidase, H and N. The different numbers have to do with different classes of them that different antibodies recognize.
Okay.
So H1N1 is a human one. It actually also has to do with the receptor. So H1 can enter human cells because H is the protein that it has to bind the cellular receptor to get in, to even cause an infection. H5 binds the bird version.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
Yeah.
See, this is as much as I have a hard time understanding that, I kind of have a baseline of fact around the difference between H1N1, H5N1, and why these birds needed to be called because of the possibility not just of human transmission, but also, if I'm not mistaken, I believe that there are very serious trade, going back to what you said earlier, trade and export rules that say if you do not disclose the fact that commercial poultry farms, ostrich farms don't have any that you do not disclose disease, that just shuts off the entire market to Canada altogether because nobody wants to import it, right? Like this was a real fucking problem for the entire poultry export industry in Canada, and these are very specific sets of rules that have been followed for generations, where if your flock of livestock, wild animals, gets filled with disease, whether it's mad cow disease, doesn't matter what it is.
It depends.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fill me in.
It depends on the disease, right? So dairy cows in the U.S. have gotten infected with H5N1, which was a big surprise last year. We didn't think that cows were very susceptible. We're not calling the dairy cows. Part of that is just because we didn't have a system in place for it, but also it isn't necessarily to prevent spread to other farms. There hasn't been enough, and there's not consensus on that. And right now, the U.S. is the only country that's known to have it in dairy cattle. So there's no coal. The U.S. hasn't agreed to the WOAH or WOA, the World Organization for Animal Health stamping out policy. Stamping out means mandatory culling if you have a positive test. That applies to poultry with high path avian flu subtypes, so H5N1, H7N9, stuff like that. For cows, if they get foot and mouth disease virus, which is not currently in Canada, and it is in some other countries, it's really bad. You do have to cull your entire cattle herd if it gets FMDV, but not necessarily for other species. So, it really depends on the virus and it depends on the species and how important it is to use culling to control outbreaks that way.
Fascinating. Okay, so let's back up to the cows with H5N1. How do you know that they have it? You're obviously testing these cattle. And if they have this and if they're creating milk, this is just a stupid guy question. Is that showing up in the milk in the United States?
Oh, it is. Yeah, that's how actually people found it. So we think that, and me and a bunch of my colleagues, including a couple of people from Canada, did this analysis back in April or May of last year to try to figure out when the virus got into cows and where it came from. Because basically in Texas, they started to notice that some dairy cows were losing production. They weren't making as much milk, and they kind of threw the whole kitchen sink at them. And finally, they decided to test them for H5, and they turned out to be positive. Since then, that's when we started testing more broadly. In the US, there's a lot of interstate transport of lactating dairy cattle. And so that's how it ended up spreading all over the place, was basically farms selling their cows to each other and moving them around. Unlike in Canada, where cows are actually tagged and they track transport from province to province or territory, in the US, there's not really great records about that. Shockingly, the US is like, whatever about agriculture. So it was really difficult to actually figure out the entire scale and scope of the outbreak. And I still think we don't know it. According to the USDA, there's not any active new outbreaks occurring in cattle, but I just don't believe it because they're not testing and the cows don't usually die. So when chickens, the reason why HPAI is called HPAI is that it's pretty much uniformly lethal in chickens and turkeys. And it specifically refers to what it does in chickens, and it's horrible. But it doesn't do that in cows. It makes them lose production. Sometimes they get a little bit sick. Occasionally, I guess they die, or they have to be euthanized. But it's not really that lethal. So the way a lot of people would notice is when the cows lose milk production unexpectedly. And so people started looking then. Some of my colleagues started looking, and I actually did this simultaneously in Canada too, with a bunch of people from all over the place. The Pan-Canadian Milk Network, yeah. But
you and all your milk testing pals, yeah.
Yeah, they were all negative, so the Milk Network hasn't broken
so Canada's
up.
Good. Canada doesn't have any H5N1 in our milk, but they have it in their milk in the United States, and the FDA just chooses to go, well, yeah.
Well, no. So actually, when this happened, it was the Biden administration, and they used to have these invitation-only expert briefing calls that were actually kind of like just telling us what they were going to say at the press conference that happened immediately after the expert briefing call. It was kind of an opportunity for them to, in a friendly way, sort of give us the talking points they'd like us to talk about with the media, because everybody in those calls was either like a hardcore flu expert and or somebody who has a large social media following or is in the media a lot. And I guess I'm sort of both. But they it wasn't like we were all working on it with the FDA and the CDC and the USDA, but they did give us like those reports. And some of the earliest studies that they were doing was to see if pasteurization would inactivate the virus, and it does. So a bunch of people had gone out and just like bought milk at the grocery store. And in Ohio, I think it was like 40% of the samples that they had were positive by PCR for flu RNA, which is the genetic material of the virus. But they did not have live virus in them. So pasteurization makes the milk safe, but raw milk, on the other hand, is a big fucking problem. And guess who loves raw milk? The current HHS secretary, Bobby Brainworm. So nobody.
That was going to be my next question, because like you're talking about pasteurization, apparently safe. You can deal with H5N1 that is in milk from dairy cows with pasteurization. But what a great fucking segue, by the way, Angie. Unbelievable segue.
I'm a natural.
You're totally a natch. This is great. Where the current head of the HHS, the secretary, as you call him, Bobby Brainworm, guy that was addicted to heroin for 14 years, a guy that admitted to eating and packing roadkill, a guy that cut the head off a whale, a guy that puts blue iodine in all of his food, a guy who is currently telling everybody he would really like it if the rest of the United States would stop with all that pasteurized, healthy milk and just start drinking whole milk at a time when 40% of dairy cows in Ohio have H5N1?
Yeah, I mean, in most states, it's not legal. There are loopholes, though. There's pet milk, so if it's designated for animal consumption, you can buy it in some places. Some states have no laws against it effectively, but if they don't have a big dairy industry, then they won't have much raw milk because it's illegal currently and it's against FDA rules to interstate transport raw milk and then sell it commercially without pasteurizing it. That might change though, because there is the guy in California who runs a raw milk farm, Mark McAfee, who had big H5 outbreaks and he was, fighting orders to like dump all of his product and stuff. Um, I had a reporter ask me to review some scientific documents that he had provided her with that raw milk proved that raw milk is supposedly so much better for you. And guess what? No, it didn't. It was just like milk has antibodies in it. Like, yeah, no shit. Milk has cow antibodies. Milk has casein in it. That's the major milk protein. So yeah, no shit. Again, of course it has casein in it. It just didn't make any sense to me. There's really nothing that shows that raw milk is somehow healthier for you than pasteurized milk. And actually raw milk is a lot worse because even if you don't get H5N1 from it, you can get Campylobacter. It's like all these bacterial things that give you terrible diarrhea. Like, not interested. I don't really
No.
drink milk anyways, though. I'm lactose intolerant.
Oh, yeah, that takes care of that issue for you. I
Yeah.
think anybody over the age of 30 has probably stopped drinking milk unless it's in their coffee, but still fascinating. And I want to talk about RFK. So, Mr. Whole Milk RFK. By the way, that fucking ostrich story that can go for miles. I can't wait to see the documentary and your role in it.
Yes, indeed.
um, but I want to talk a little bit about RFK's vaccine panel. I want to talk about the people he has surrounded himself with, specifically at the NIH, Dr. Malone. This week, as we've seen over the past 10 months, stunning admissions from anti science assholes that have surrounded RFK Jr., where they're telling people that the vaccine schedule for children needs to be mixed up after almost annihilating measles, mumps, rubella, pertussis, whooping cough, and the MMR vaccine, chickenpox vaccine, every vaccine known to man over the last 400 years, vaccinology has been a thing. And that is why we are all here. That is why mortality has gone from, back in the 1800s. Hey, fuck, lucky if you got to 50. Lucky, actually, if your child was born and you lived. That's the other thing. Infant mortality was like 25%. And now infant mortality, specifically in first world countries like Canada, because of vaccinology, because we take care of our immunity, because we take care of our community. The idea that RFK Jr. is now saying kids don't need the hepatitis shot. You don't need to combine your MMR vaccines, and vaccine schedules are being decided on by people who are literally anti-science, part of that fucking entire mega anti-expert, anti-science community who have either been defrocked, deregulated, or had their licenses taken away. And I want your thoughts just on the Hep B stuff, but I also want to kind of lean back into the people that are making this possible, trying to murder as many fucking Americans as they humanly can.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically it. And you were talking about the panel. Maybe I should just explain that really quickly. Especially since I don't know how much of your audience is Canadian, but I imagine that
Like
most regular
20%, 20%
Okay.
maybe. Yeah.
But I mean, even in the US, like I don't think that unless you're like me, where you literally are a vaccine researcher and the editor in chief of a journal called Vaccine, like you spend a lot of time thinking about policy making advisory panels. for vaccine recommendations. So I'll just explain really quick what this is. So in the US and actually in Canada as well, although it's a little different in Canada because vaccines are administered by provincial health systems, which is not the case in the US. So there's a national panel that's sort of the equivalent of the US panel in Canada called NACI, the National Advisory Committee on Immunization. In the US, it's called the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, or ACIP. It's a panel of independent experts run out of CDC. So it's people, in academia, people who work in medicine, people who work in policymaking, who are not government employees, but they work very closely with government employees to use government data to review evidence according to a standardized framework, and then they make recommendations based on that. So these are vaccines that have already been approved by the FDA, and then ACIP is telling Americans who should get them. And this is really important because even though they are recommendations and you can take them or leave them, it's what insurance companies use to decide whether or not they're going to reimburse vaccines. And it's what a program called VFC, or Vaccines for Children, that's run out of the CDC, uses to determine which kids, low-income kids, are going to get which vaccines on the schedule. So it's actually, even though it's an advisory panel, it's pretty consequential. So Kennedy in June decided to fire the entire 17-member ACIP committee, and these were all, highly regarded vaccinologists and clinicians. I know quite a few of them. Really, really super qualified people to be evaluating this evidence and making these recommendations. He replaced them with a bunch of people who were either completely inexperienced or outright anti-vaxxers for the most part. There's one guy, Cody Meissner, who actually does have a lot of vaccine policymaking experience. Everybody else, though, is either an anti-vaxxer or just somebody who was chosen. In some cases, it looks like because they just had pro-MAGA tweets or pro-Maha tweets, based on their social media content. So, I mean, they're doctors, but they don't have any experience with that.
Give me an example. I know Dr. Malone. I know Malone is on the panel, but give me an example of the most unqualified person on that panel.
Well, Malone's pretty unqualified. I mean, Malone technically, I guess scientifically, would be more qualified because maybe I should explain who Robert Malone is. He is the self-proclaimed inventor of mRNA vaccines. That's not the case. He did one thing that was a step on the way to making mRNA vaccines back in the 90s. He did transfection of DNA into some kind of monkey, I think, and mice, and showed that he could actually get the DNA in the cell and get it to make protein, which is the basis for using a DNA or an RNA vaccine. So that was good, but it was still incremental, essentially. Somebody else would have eventually figured out how to do that. We do a lot of transfection in my field. So he's not the inventor of mRNA vaccines, but he is a very bitter man who looks like Kenny Rogers, and he runs a horse farm in Virginia, and he writes conspiracy theory books about the New World Order and how they're using vaccines as, quote, psychological bioterrorism to control everybody. And it's full of MK Ultra, mind control type shit. And, he's way out there, but he makes a fortune off of his Substack, which has 500,000 subscribers. He's been making the tour, making the rounds of every single anti-vax medical freedom rally that they have. He's making a lot of money off of this. So he was appointed to the ACIP, along with a lot of other anti-vaxxers and then very unqualified people. Malone is distinctly unqualified because he claims to have expertise that he doesn't have because of this past experience. But he's also actively antagonistic towards vaccines, and especially mRNA vaccines, because he's basically butthurt that he's not getting Nobel Prizes for them, like Katalin Karikó and Drew Weissman. Because they actually invented them, not him.
it always comes back to that for all of the people that are involved in the MAGA Maha movement.
Oh, yeah.
It's just fucking pure resentment. It's we've got this dude up in Canada. His name's Dr. William Mackus.
I know him.
Yeah. Total fucking crack job. He's an absolute lunatic. Threatened to sue me a bunch of times because I told the truth about him. He's a fucking crackpot lunatic who lost his license to practice medicine because he was trying to treat people with things like horse paste. The creator of the cartoon, I think it's called Delbert. Delbert, I think his name is.
Scott Adams
Scott
is his
Adams.
name.
He I feel awful for that man. He was hard against COVID, hard against vaccines. Then he gets, I think it's pancreatic cancer,
It's
and he
prostate cancer.
prostate cancer, my bad. And he goes to, and Macus gives him a call and he's like, I got it. I'm going to treat you with my magic potions up here in Canada. Not only did they not work, Adams comes and does a video and he's like, hey, listen, I was fucking wrong about everything. Like, and you've got guys like William Macus, who, if he was American, might actually be on the vaccine panel for RFK Jr. He's that much of a crackpot.
Yeah. And I'm surprised that they haven't actually brought more crackpots in. I mean, actually, nothing would be stopping them from bringing in Macus. They used to, back during the pandemic in Trump 1, they had another Canadian guy named Paul Alexander who was some kind of
Psycho.
COVID.
He was a convoy guy. Yeah. You have to.
Yeah. And he had a quote that one of my colleagues actually wrote a book called he said, we want them infected. He wanted everybody to go out and get COVID and get infected with it. This was actually an idea that was started by one of the former ACIP members. This is a new ACIP guy who Kennedy put on there. Last week, he left the ACIP to go be the chief science officer at the new Health and Human Services in-house think tank that's going to be developing all the new innovations for the MAHA movement. His name is Martin Kulldorff, and he wrote a policy proposal called the Great Barrington Declaration with the current NIH director, Jay Bhattacharya. And that was essentially a libertarian-funded effort to reopen the economy prematurely by downplaying the severity of the pandemic. The idea was that people who needed focused protection, is what they called it, people who were vulnerable or high risk for COVID, would sequester sort of indefinitely, and everybody else goes out and gets COVID. And like we party and everything opens back up. We're all happy. No more masks. Because we've got natural herd immunity on our side. And I mean, some of my other colleagues who are epi-modelers tried to predict what the effect of that would have been, and it would have been at least 1 million more deaths in the U.S. So not a good proposal.
Like a COVID party, but chickenpox party, but it's a COVID party, right?
And it's nationwide all the time. So
it's like a COVID rave. Yeah, it sounds.
Yeah, it's it's a national COVID rave. And also those people who are in the focused protection, like quarantine jail, I guess, those people, how are they getting groceries? How are they doing anything? Because they can't leave the house because everybody else constantly has COVID. It didn't really make a lot of sense. But you know what? Those guys all say to this day that it would have been way better if we had done that. And so Martin Kulldorff was in charge of the ACIP. It's an inherently anti-vax attitude as well, because a lot of those same people, and Macus is one of them, started saying when the vaccines came out that natural immunity, infection-acquired immunity, is superior somehow to vaccine-acquired immunity, which is not true. I mean, at this point, most of us have hybrid immunity. I've been vaccinated 7 or 8 times. I lost track. I've had COVID once. It's not that big of a deal. I think I didn't have very severe COVID because I'd had 6 vaccine doses before I got it, in 2023. So, they don't make a lot of sense in terms of their ideas about how immunology works, but
can we get to one of those? Can we get to one of those? Because the ones that don't make sense to me is splitting up the MMR vaccines and changing that schedule willy-nilly. And that's why I wanted to lay the tracks about the unqualified assholes that are currently on the board and changing these schedules that have saved hundreds of millions of lives over the years, literally tens of millions of lives in the United States. Same thing with Canada, North America. If we don't have these vaccines, we're not here. Just really important to kind of lay that track. But I want to talk about what happens if they are successful in changing the MMR schedule specifically, and they seem like they're going after vaccines for children more than they are any other group, right? They're not overly concerned about COVID. Now it's the quality of life-saving vaccines that we've been using and scheduling, and yes, they are archaic, for 100 years, that are responsible for our mortality and us living this incredible life in a first world country.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. And I think, to talk about some of these things, I think the most important thing to emphasize is that it actually doesn't matter that they're incompetent. It actually matters more for them because they can't actually seem to get through an ACIP meeting like efficiently and actually make votable recommendations. But it the fact that they're inept doesn't really matter that much because they don't actually care about the science or the evidence. They are anti-vax. Their goal is to eliminate as many vaccines as possible, and now they essentially have President Trump's approval to do that. On Friday, right after the ACIP meeting ended, 2 hours later, Trump issues a presidential memorandum that says that he's directing both CDC and FDA, which is completely depleted of expertise, by the way, and run also by anti-vaxxers who are part of the same crowd, essentially, says that the U.S. needs to align its childhood vaccination schedule with so-called peer-developed nations. And it mentions the country of Denmark, which the current top drug regulator in the United States is an anti-vaxxer named Tracy Beth Hogue, who used to live in Denmark and has suggested that we should just adopt Denmark's schedule because Denmark's a great country and, they don't have hardly any vaccines on their vaccine schedule. They also have a socialized government, a national healthcare system, so they have lower prevalence of HBV, or hepatitis B virus. So that's why the recent recommendation to delay the birth dose was approved, was that partly countries like Denmark don't have a problem with it, so the U.S. should align their policy. And President Trump has basically said, let's be Denmark, which I find really interesting that President Trump wants to actually emulate a small Scandinavian socialist country. But
that he wants to invade, by the way. Yes.
I'm just glad that she kept my grandfather's country, Norway, out of her mouth because, I'm sort of anti-Danish, anti-Swede as a result of my grandfather's Norwegian supremacist attitude.
Those Norwegians, they really keep to themselves, don't they? They're just
I mean,
up
we're
there
just the
hoarding all
best.
the oil money, eating really incredible fish dishes, and no one can crack Norway. It's always been the way. Norwegian people are like Canadian people. They're like, yeah, we just get on with it, and we don't really give a shit what goes on in your country right now. But if it comes to our country, we'll deal with you. Now, project out what would happen if they change that schedule for just hepatitis B.
So for just hepatitis B, the results of that aren't going to be seen for a long time because hepatitis B prevalence is extremely low. That vaccine is extremely safe. It's extremely effective. Really quick, I'm just going to tell this little story. My uncle, by just coincidence, is a hepatologist in Alaska. He was drafted to go to Vietnam while he was in medical school in 1970, and made a deal with the U.S. government that if he didn't go to Vietnam, he would join the public health service once he finished medical school. So he did that, was sent to Alaska, where there was the highest prevalence of HBV in the world in Western Alaskan indigenous communities. He started vaccinating them in the early 1980s when the vaccine first came out. And he just had to close down a study that he's been doing for the last 41 years because too many of the study participants were dying of old age instead of hepatitis B related illnesses and cancer. So that's a pretty good success story when you can't carry out the study anymore because everybody just got so old that they died naturally. Really effective vaccine, really safe, and it essentially eliminated HBV, including by using the birth dose in these communities. But the problem with HBV is that it's really asymptomatic for the most part in most people until you develop a downstream illness from it, which is usually liver cancer or liver failure and fibrosis. And that can take decades to happen. So you don't know that you have HBV. You're probably not getting tested because most people think that it's transmitted only by sex and injecting drug use, which is not true. It can be transmitted through any sort of blood contact, which in households, especially with little kids, happens a lot more frequently than you would think. So it can be sharing toenail clippers or toothbrushes, like razors, whatever. So it can spread, but you don't see the effects of it for a very long time. And so I don't think we will see that for probably a decade or two, the effects of that. But something like the MMR, we're going to start seeing immediately because we've already had measles outbreaks. And here in Canada, we've actually had even more, even though, there hasn't been any sort of problem with the MMR vaccine here. Certainly the problem becomes when officials like the Premier of Alberta, but also like everybody in HHS right now, start talking about these vaccines as if they're not safe and as if they don't work. And so that's the problem. And with the MMRV, which you mentioned, which is the MMR vaccine against measles, mumps, and rubella, plus chickenpox or varicella virus, varicella zoster virus, that was canned by the ACIP because it has a slightly higher risk of febrile seizure, which is basically it's a baby has a high fever and they have a seizure. It's usually not a prolonged illness. It's not something that has any lasting effects, but it can be pretty scary. And it's a very small risk still, but it's slightly higher than it is for the MMR. So they said, okay, there's the MMR and there's the varicella vaccine. People can get those separately. So we're going to take this, we're going to de-recommend this. I think that break it up shit that Trump said, and this hasn't happened yet, but this is my prediction of what they might do, is he says Tylenol, causes autism and you shouldn't give it to pregnant mothers or babies. But you know what you know how you reduce the risk of a febrile seizure? You reduce fever. And you know how you do that? You give the kid Tylenol. And so can't give the kids the autism pill. So they're going to have a fever. You can't reduce the risk. So no more MMR, just make it monovalent, which is M, M, and R separately. Sounds good in practice. They were originally developed as monovalent vaccines. However, there are no approved monovalent MMR vaccines. And the FDA people, who are also, again, anti-vax nutcases, have said now that they will not approve any new vaccines, which these would be, without a placebo-controlled randomized trial, which we'll never be able to do because it would be unethical to experiment on children, giving them a placebo and exposing them to a potentially lethal virus. So
catch-22 then, right, for their dreams.
Yeah, and you have to think about this. They are presenting this as if it's some sort of alternative scientific hypothesis that we should consider and that it's reasonable to consider it. But in reality, it's actually just like administratively exploiting the system in order to strip access to these vaccines from people by not banning them, but by making it still impossible for people to get them.
So it's fucking wild, Ange. Dr. Angela Rasmussen, everybody has to go and follow her. Hit that little gray Chiron button at the top where you see my name, you see Dr. Angela Rasmussen's name, and you'll immediately follow her. You need to have her in your life because not only is she incredibly entertaining, not only does she have a sailor's mouth, that's one of the reasons why I love the woman. She's absolutely fact-based, science-based, and she entertains you while she educates you. And this education that we got today has been like absolutely stunning to me. I've sat here like with bated breath going, oh my God, that makes all the sense in the world to me. But what makes more sense to me even after this conversation, whether it is changing the schedule for childhood vaccines, whether it's MMR, MMRV, or the Hep B vaccine for children, there also, it feels like with this whole Tylenol autism designation, which was fucking still funny to me, by the way.
I know.
It seems like they're going after any relief for children if they are not like it's like they're taking away all the tools of the disposal of raising a healthy child and having that child get relief from any kind of pain or suffering they might actually go through, whether or not they're vaccinated, whether or not they're sick, et cetera, et cetera. That's what it seems like to me.
It is. I mean, essentially, I think that there are two things going on here. One are people who, like Kennedy, I suspect, who are actually eugenicists. They believe in like a survival of the fittest sort of attitude, and the fittest are usually wealthy white people, like who are just like them. Everybody else, like, go fuck themselves, basically. The other are people who just don't give a shit at all, and they're just making money, or acquiring more power, and they don't care if basically potentially millions of children die as a result. And
how many of the people that are involved in this panel, how many people around RFK, how many of those people have these bunk wellness brands where they sell you brain powder and alternative treatment? To me, that's a huge driver of the anti-science movement here. Massive.
The new chair of the ACIP, who replaced Martin Kulldorff, the great Barrington guy who's now doing Bobby's think tank, he started an organization called Frontline Care Clinicians Against COVID or something, FLCCC. They've now changed the name to the Independent Medical Alliance. basically so that they could expand their ivermectin grifting brand to other diseases besides COVID, essentially. So now they're like William Mack, as you mentioned, like promotes treating cancer with ivermectin. They're now trying to treat all this other stuff with ivermectin. I mean, it's ridiculous because the irony to me is that if RFK did have a brainworm, you know what the treatment would be for that?
Ivermectin.
Ivermectin. Like it would actually work for that. I guess depending on the type of worm, but that's what ivermectin is. It's a dewormer, and it actually does work very well for that. It just doesn't work for all these other things, but it's cheap, and so it feels to people, I think, when they're getting it, that they're getting some sort of alternative medicine because it is a real medicine, and it's not expensive for them to get. But what they pay for is all of the expert advice that they're getting from all of the ivermectin people. So, like, yeah, literally, the chair of ASIP is an ivermectin grifter.
I mean, I'm no doctor, but like I've interviewed several. You're obviously the most high profile doctor with serious expertise in this area. But just to put it to bed, what you're saying is for respiratory diseases, horse dewormer doesn't work.
No, unless it's caused by a worm. Yeah, no. I suppose there are like lung worms and things. I'm not a parasitologist. Viruses are parasites, but if it's larger than a virus, like, or if it's actually got a cell involved that it's its own, I don't know that much about it.
All right.
I definitely don't know that much about worms.
Well, you need to dig into that one because then you can have a bulletproof conversation with any. I loved the horse pace community over the past 5 years. It's really kind of
Yeah.
it's really drawn down. There aren't a lot of people out there that are willing to admit that they went to, their local veterinary clinic and cleaned out the apple flavored ivermectin paste aisle for a respiratory.
I mean, I will admit that I did not do that because I didn't actually ever do that. I've never purchased veterinary drugs for my own use, and
Well,
certainly,
there's some people out in Alberta that would like to talk to you about that. There, you get.
no, I don't need it because I get vaccinated.
Dr. Angela Rasmussen, ladies and gentlemen, you need her in your life, and I want to thank you for doing this, folks. We're going to try and do a little bit of a health talk on a weekly basis. To not only have some fun, to debunk what needs to be debunked, but also to give you some information that will affirm the fact that you're not crazy. They are. And when you have people like Angela, Dr. Angie, in your life, you hang on to those people like you're in a storm. And I'll tell you why, because we are in a storm. And we're in a storm of misinformation, information warfare, lies, and gaslighting, where experts like Dr. Angela Rasmussen, who is one of the world's foremost virologists, have people show up to her place of work and try to get her fired for telling the truth about something that she knows that none of them know anything about. That has always shocked me. The fact that you're still here and the fact that you're standing there laughing about this stuff and the fact that you battle as much as you do for the health and the community of Canadians as an imported American. My God, it is awesome to have you on the show today. And I've been a massive fan of yours for a long time. So thank you for doing this. And hopefully we'll do this in about a week or two. No, we're going to do it next Wednesday, I think.
Yeah, we're going to do it next Wednesday.
All right, Wednesdays. Health.
I took the rest of the year off so that I could actually get more work done on my days off. Yeah, I did. So I'm off for the rest of the year after this week. So yeah, see you next Wednesday, Dean. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we should have done it on Tuesdays now.
Yeah, we can do it every day next week if you want.
All right, you got it. Health Talk, Dr. Angela Rasmussen. Thanks for doing this. Great to see you.
Great to see you too, Dean. Take it easy.
All right, you too,
Bye-bye.
Dr. Angela Rasmussen. She is that. I tell you what. I got to know her a few weeks ago. One of the greatest human beings I've ever met. Absolutely will not be intimidated by the hillbillies. Like zero. She's got no time. Ain't nobody got time for that. Give her a follow. Give her a subscription. She is pushing back against RFK Jr. They know her. They're happy she's in Canada. I'll tell you that. They're not happy that she has millions of people that follow her. They're not happy that she tells the truth and she is undeterred, unafraid. That is a boss right there. So give Dr. Angela Rasmussen your follow and a paid sub too. She'd really appreciate it. Thank you all for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed that health talk. If you have questions for Dr. Angela, make sure you DM me or subscribe to her, DM her, and we'll get to some of those questions next Wednesday. We want to do a really interactive job. That was a really great way to kind of rip the cover off and say we're going to be working together. But we want to work together for you and with you to help you answer these questions because it's kind of like having a doctor on call who knows more about virology, vaccinology, pandemics, and diseases than anyone else in the world. All right? We're rounding out the ecosystem. We're bringing more people. We need a bigger boat. So make sure you run and subscribe. DeanBlundell.substack.com is where you can find us. Same thing with Ange. And make sure that you share this with as many people as humanly possible. If you learn something today, like, 40% of America's milk has H5N1 in it. If you learn something today, like, you can't treat a respiratory disease with horse paste. If you learn something today about the lack of expertise that are currently changing your ability to live a long and healthy life and putting your child's life at risk before they are fucking born, you need to follow and subscribe to Dr. Angela Rasmussen today. You can check it out right there on the Chiron. Hit it and keep her handy. So you're going to doctor in your back pocket that's well-intentioned. Plus, she is way too fun to hang out with, as you can tell. Have a great day, everybody. We'll see you at 3 o'clock. Back with the 5 stack with my friend Zev Shalev. Coming up at 3, we've got some humdingers today. Humdingers, including Trump literally threatening the International Criminal Court to put new language in their founding documentation that says they will never, ever, ever investigate or charge Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, and anybody involved in the Trump regime with any war crimes. It's a big deal. We'll also talk a little bit about Ryan Liz's latest part 5, which is stunning. Everybody should go and check it out. And you can have a little pre-read before we get to 3 o'clock in the 5 stack over at DeanBlundell.substack.com. 25% off annual subscriptions. You can lock that price in. You get unlimited access to the chat. You can ask us any questions you want, including health talk with Dr. Angela Rasmussen. And founding members pay once. I think it's $8 a month. I'm just super, super grateful for all of you. I've told you this many times. You've saved my life. I am you. We are the same person trying to make sense of this whole thing. So the fact that you come here to, have an entertaining conversation, listen to experts is really, really important to me. I am not an expert. I say that all the time. That's why I bring experts on the show. It's really important to me that we put that in people's lives, specifically your lives, not just so that you can understand what's going on, but and this is like literally the most important thing to me. So you can literally deeply know that you're not crazy. They are. Have a great day. See you at 3 o'clock on the 5 stack. Bye, all.